California has set a goal of 5 million electric vehicles on state roads by 2030. Is that possible? We'll ask Noel Perry, founder of Next 10, that recently commissioned a report on the road ahead for zero-emission vehicles in California.
Additional funding for the Maddy report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. Chevron's Coalinga oil field and Fresno County have been doing side by side for over 100 years. Learn more at doers.com. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
So will electric vehicles be as common in 20 years as cell phones are today? That's a real possibility according to our guest, Noel Perry, founder of Next 10, who commissioned a detailed report entitled The Road Ahead for Zero-Emission Vehicles in California, Market Trends and Policy Analysis. Quite a mouthful. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's an honor to be here.
So first, electric vehicles, EVs, that's an all-encompassing term. Let's break it down. What are the different categories of EVs?
Sure. So electric vehicles are described as pure electric vehicles along with hybrid vehicles such as, for example, a plug-in Prius or a Volt. Also, we have a term called zero-emission vehicle, and I'll refer to those as ZEVs during our conversation. And for the state of California, when the state of California talks about trying to achieve its electric vehicle goal, it's really this ZEV goal. And the ZEV goal includes one more area in addition to pure electric vehicles and hybrids, and that's hydrogen cars.
A fuel cell?
Exactly.
Okay. So historically, California's led the nation in EV sales. Are they becoming more mainstream?
They are, and let me explain that California today has approximately 340,000 zero-emission vehicles. And if you look at the percent of market share of all cars in California, that's approximately 4.5%. And the growth has been very significant over the last few years. And the question about mainstream, it's starting to move towards mainstream.
Yeah, I noticed in your report, it actually jumped a whole percentage point from last year to this year. So it's moving up. But just to put things in perspective, I also read another report that was talking about the Ford Series pickup.
Right.
And they actually, the Ford Series pickup actually has more people buying them than all EVs put together. So put it in perspective. One of the things we do see is that in the urban areas, EVs are very popular. In the rural areas, it's the pickup trucks. But,
That's right.
But anyway, so let's talk about how California compares globally. How do we compare with other nations? We're almost a nation state.
That's right. We're, what are we, the sixth largest economy in the world? So California is an international leader with electric vehicles. However, there is a lot of significant movement around the world towards electric vehicles. China, India, England, France, and the Netherlands have all created plans to phase out the internal combustion engine over the next 20, 30 years. That's very significant. As a matter of fact, that was the genesis for this report. This happened at the end of 2017. And we were sitting around at Next 10 and we said, this is really, is this a turning point? Combined with that, we have the car manufacturers such as Volkswagen, Volvo, Nissan. They are also working towards electrifying their fleets.
Yeah, they're moving in that direction. China, of course, is a big push here too. A lot of 5%, I think, in China, the fleet is electric. So what does all this mean for California? This move toward electric vehicles.
I think it means that California will continue to be one of the international leaders. We are the leader in America. We are the leader in terms of technology and also policies at the Capitol. And assuming that we continue to push things forward and don't have any major hiccups, we are going to be a world leader with electric vehicles.
So originally the state had this goal of what was it, 1.5 million ZEVs by 2025, and they're increasing that. I mean, 1.5 million, that's a lot of cars.
That's a lot of cars, but we feel confident that that's going to be achieved. Our report indicated that we're on track to achieve the 1.5 million ZEVs by 2025.
When that original goal came out, they were talking about a 35% increase annual growth from 2013 to 2025 to hit that target. You're actually going faster than that, so you don't even need that amount. It's quite a bit less, I think 20% annually now?
Absolutely, that's correct. So we need to hit about 20% per year going forward, and it is definitely doable.
Okay, so up next we're going to talk about some of the factors that are driving the adoption of EVs. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with F. Noel Perry, founder of Next 10, a nonprofit focused on innovation and the intersection of the economy, the environment, and quality of life issues in California, about a recent report that Next 10 did about the market growth potential of EVs, electric vehicles. So a big issue, obviously, is price. What is the current cost of electric vehicles compared to regular internal combustion gas cars?
Sure. At this point, electric vehicles are still more expensive than fossil-fueled cars, but these prices are coming down. Our study looked at the life cycle costs of about 17 different models, both EVs and fossil-fueled cars, and what we found is that the Nissan and the Smart Car are becoming more price competitive with fossil-fuel cars, because one of the major things important about electric vehicles is that they have very minimal maintenance costs and the fuel costs are less than a gas-powered car.
You know, one of the things you mentioned in your report, you cite some statistics and some surveys that talk about, you know, the cost of cars, but they're doing it based on, it was a Rosted and Ferry, I believe, was the name of it, 2014 study, that they were saying average use of 12,330 miles.
Exactly.
But then when you look at U.S. Department of Transportation, saying that's not California. California, we like our cars, and we drive a lot more. It's like something like 14,435 miles. So the numbers are actually better or worse with the higher number of miles traveled in California.
Yeah, so we did the report, we did the study looking at the 14,000 miles. That is assumed to be the average travel amount of Californians. And the electric vehicles are becoming more and more competitive when you look at them over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
They begin to pay for themselves.
They're not there yet. They're not there yet. We have a ways to go, but they're absolutely more competitive and continuing to be more competitive.
It's interesting. Bloomberg Finance said that electric vehicles are going to be cost competitive by 2025. They should be cost competitive.
Exactly, exactly.
So according to your report, the biggest factors driving the price of EVs are the cost of research and development and the cost of batteries. So let's talk about the cost of research and development. Why can't car makers just piggyback on what they already know about, you know, four wheels and an engine with internal combustion, just apply that to the electric vehicles?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think the way to answer that is to look at how long we've had gas-powered cars. We've had gas-powered cars for over 100 years. That's many years of innovation. That's many years of creating more efficiencies. And electric cars are very, very different. One of the major ways they're different is that they have about 2,000, I think about 1,890 less moving parts. So we have a different product here, and the R&D is hugely important. The battery costs, as you mentioned, is also hugely important.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about battery costs as a huge driver. How long did these batteries last?
That's a great question, and I can only answer generally because we didn't really go deeply into that into our report. But I would just, it's maybe kind of a cop-out, but I just say that for different vehicles, they last different amounts of time.
Some are more efficient than others.
Some are more efficient than others, but the important thing that we learned in that report was that the cost of batteries has gone down 74% over the last 6 years.
Yeah, from 2010 to 2016, a drop of 74%. That's pretty significant.
It's very big.
So to replace a battery, getting to be less expensive.
Absolutely.
So what about the supply constraints? You know, batteries have to be put together, and they require things like cobalt, lithium, graphite. I assume those prices are really starting to spike now. What effect will that have on battery prices?
Right, so the supply constraints that you allude to relate more to political happenings in different countries of origin from where these products come from. We're talking about cobalt, we're talking about lithium.
And Congo is a big producer of cobalt.
Exactly, and so there are different battery manufacturers that are looking at different materials, alternative materials, to be able to make batteries without some of these other products these other materials that we're talking about, and that should make a difference in terms of not having that supply constraint over time.
You know, according to your report, it says the price of lithium-ion batteries today is about $200 per kilowatt hour, down from $1,200 2 decades ago, and they're expecting that price to drop to $100 by the early 2020. So a big drop in the cost of batteries.
Absolutely.
So
and as you said, that's the main driver of the cost of an electric
So
vehicle.
if things are going so well, do we need government incentives? Has the market matured so we don't need government incentives anymore?
That's a great question. And for the time being, for the near term, I think government incentives continuing will be a good thing. But eventually the market's going to mature over the next 5 or so years to the point where we don't need these incentives. However, on the infrastructure side, to have government and utilities involved in helping to fund and create policies for the creation of infrastructure,
charging
stations,
right.
That's important, and that's an important role for them to play.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about more about that in a minute. We're also going to talk about some of the performance issues surrounding EVs. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with F. Noel Perry, a founder of Next 10, about the future of electric vehicles in California. And for California to meet its air quality goals, electric vehicles are going to have to become as commonplace today in 20 years as cell phones are today. Will that happen? Range anxiety. That sounds like that's a loaded term, but it's been a significant barrier to consumer adoption. What is the typical range of electric vehicles, and has it improved over time?
Sure. Range anxiety is absolutely a concern of people who are considering buying an electric vehicle, and range distances have gone down and down and down over the last few years. And so if we were to take an average amount for a pure electric vehicle, I would say it's 80 miles up to over 200. I recently bought a Chevy Bolt, that's with a B, B-O-L-T, and the range is approximately 238 miles. And we know that the Tesla gets more than that.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people think, oh, I need a car to go 200 miles, but I was reading in your report, 87% of consumers' daily use is less than that, less than 80 miles. So for a car getting around town, electric vehicle, even though it only has a range of 80 miles, which a lot of them do, it still will satisfy most people's needs for their daily commute.
Right, and that's what the education needs to happen on the part of electric vehicle makers, to show consumers that it's a good chance that an electric vehicle will work for them for their daily driving habits.
People are just worried about being stranded, of course, and we're going to talk a little bit about infrastructure in a moment. What about consumer choice? How many EV models are out there for consumers to choose from?
Sure. There's 150 electric vehicle models around the world. China offers 75 models. In California, there's 25 to 30 models in the major metropolitan areas. But unfortunately, in the rest of the U.S., for the most part, there's 7 or fewer electric vehicle models available, and that's what's going to be changing and increasing over time, we hope.
You know, your report says that there were 25 electric vehicles introduced in China in 2016 alone. So a big increase, and that also impacts purchasing, right? People have more choices, more likely that they're going to buy one of these cars. Another big issue is convenience, and that is the time it takes to recharge an EV. That's a big issue. It's been a major barrier to adoption. What is the current state of these public charging stations?
Sure. The amount of time that it takes to charge an electric vehicle varies significantly. For the Tesla with the supercharges, it can be under an hour. And then for others, it might be 3 to 4 hours. And for other cars, it might be 6 to 8 hours. And for other electric vehicles, it might be an overnight charge. And as we talked earlier, it's very, very important, and this is happening. Charging times need to go down for convenience so that the incentivization for the consumer is greater.
You know, it's interesting, the majority of EVs are charged at home. So it's actually, you plug it in at night, who cares, right?
Exactly.
But there's a lot of renters out there in California with the price of housing, a lot of renters, particularly in the urban areas. What is the state doing to address that problem?
Sure. That's a very important issue because probably half, a little less than half of Californians are renters, many of them in multi-dwelling units, and it's almost impossible for them, if they don't work with their landlord, to have a charging station. So I know that the state is looking at different policies to try to create the possibility for this, And this is an area that is going to require some innovation in terms of policy thinking on the state.
And I was reading the report, I found something very interesting in it, and it was talking about level 2 charging stations that take 2 to 4 hours to charge a car, a cost between $1,000 and $2,000 essentially to create these stations. But if you do a fast charging station, a lot more expensive, $14,000 to $91,000 for that, saving time. So do you think there's going to be kind of a new supercharging technology out there that's going to change things?
Honda is working on a supercharging technology with some new batteries that they're coming up with that apparently can reduce the amount of charging to, I don't exactly know whether it's 30 minutes or less than 30 minutes.
It was actually less than 30 minutes in your report.
Less than 30 minutes, correct.
That's pretty fast.
That's fast.
I think it goes down as low as 15 minutes.
Right, 15
Go in and
minutes.
get a cup of coffee, you know, check your Twitter feed or whatever, and your car's ready to go.
Exactly.
So that's pretty fast. You know, one thing you mentioned, I want to just touch on this before we end this segment, and that is maintenance. It seems like you're talking about the number of moving parts of an internal combustion engine gas car versus an electric vehicle. Seems like EVs would have a distinct advantage over gas engines because of that in terms of maintenance costs.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I recently bought a Bolt, and I'm sitting in the dealer room talking to the gentleman, and he presents a contract. The contract was only for tires. That was my maintenance contract for tires. As I said, there's like, what did I say, 1,890 approximate moving parts for a fuel vehicle, and so there's only a few for an electric car, so that is a distinct advantage.
Yeah, interesting. Well, up next we're going to talk about some of the public policy issues involved with the adoption of EVs. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Hepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with F. Noel Perry of Next 10 about the state's push to get 5 million EVs on California roads in the next decade. So what are other countries doing when it comes to electric vehicles?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, there is a movement around the world of major economies around the world towards planning for electric vehicles and kind of phasing out internal combustion engine vehicles. We talked earlier about China and India and France and England and the Netherlands, and so there is a very big push around the world.
There's actually a push even recently about diesel engines in Germany. They're trying to phase those out as well, at least within certain cities that have air pollution problems.
Sure.
You know, your report states that California is on pace to meet its goal of 1.5 million electric cars by 2025, but Governor Brown recently upped the ante and announced a goal of putting 5 million EVs on state roads by 2030. Difficult or impossible?
Sure. I'll just mention that the governor threw a curveball at us because we were all ready to come out with our report on the following Monday, and then he comes out Thursday and changes it to 5 million. Okay. But we are confident that the 5 million goal is doable. It's not going to be that easy. However, if we continue to build the infrastructure that we need, that's going to be critical. If the cost of EVs goes down, if the range goes up, if the number of charging stations available goes up, if the number of models increase in number, that's going to be really important. And as you alluded to at the beginning of the program, we talked about smartphones and the S-curve. Certain advanced technologies sometimes do not grow in a linear or incremental way. They do an S-curve. And so it is possible that in 20 years or so, 30 years, electric cars will be ubiquitous like smartphones.
It's just funny, you know, my daughter, who's 12, I showed her a rotary phone. She had no idea. How does this thing even work? And it's funny because you grow up with that and it's changed. Technology is just so rapidly. It's changing. It's a future shock, right? So what is the state doing to hit those EV targets?
Sure. Well, one thing I should have mentioned with regard to the governor's announcement is that they are looking at putting $2.5 billion towards the creation of new charging stations, essentially 250,000 total charging stations by 2030. That's really important. And the state is working utilities are working to increase the infrastructure for charging stations. There are different pools of money that have been used over time to create infrastructure. So it's happening from a number of different quarters.
And there are incentives out there. State has incentives anywhere between $1,500 and $2,500. The federal government, at least now, has incentives for $7,500 for these cars. It brings that price down. So there are public policies in California that are helping the development of this charging infrastructure. What are some of the specific places where they're getting the money to increase this infrastructure. We got the governor doing his thing, but we've also got Volkswagen settlement. There's some money coming from that.
Right.
Can you explain some of these other sources?
So the Volkswagen settlement was for $800 million. So over the next 10 years, Volkswagen is obligated to spend that amount of money, $800 million, on creating the infrastructure for electric vehicles in California. And there was a state bill passed a few years ago that created funds to help build infrastructure. Certain air quality boards around California are working to help with the incentivization of EVs. So the money's coming from different quarters and will probably be increasing.
Yeah, so you note that all these changes have implications for the state's infrastructure and the electrical grid. What are some of the public policy issues for infrastructure and for the electrical grid?
Sure. Just talking first about the grid is hugely important. It's kind of a black box for a lot of us, very hard to understand. But the fact of the matter is, as electric vehicles become more ubiquitous around the state, we have to be able to supply that energy affordably and also reliable. So I would just say that in general, and I know that there are different studies. Next 10 is going to be working on a study on this, the interaction between the EVs and the grid. We're going to be coming out with that later in this year. But there's a number of people looking at this, and the rates are important too. In terms
but also
of when you
there's
charge.
implications here for fuel taxes too and roads. If electric vehicles aren't paying gas tax, where's the money coming to keep our roads maintained?
Right, absolutely. The funding of transportation projects in California comes from the gas tax. For the most part, electric vehicles don't pay that gas tax. So there's going to take some innovation in Sacramento to figure out how do we make sure that we have this funding for transportation in California as EVs become more widespread.
Because they were talking about, I know in Oregon they were doing some studies on charging your per mile use. So it doesn't matter whether it's a gas car or electric car, you're paying for the use of the roads.
Exactly.
And so California might have to look at something like that as well in the future?
Exactly. That's very important.
So you think it's going to happen? So are we going to have 5 million vehicles by 2030?
I think that the S-curve that I referred to earlier in terms of this kind of growth for electric vehicles, that's absolutely possible. We don't know as we sit here whether or not that's going to happen, but things seem to indicate it's going in that direction.
Yep.
We know that prices are coming down. We know that range is going up. We know that more models are available. There's greater infrastructure.
So your next car may be an electric vehicle. I want to thank F. Noel Perry from Next 10 for joining us. If you want to stay up with state and local politics, you can follow the Maddy Institute on Facebook, Twitter, or log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.